welcome, Grace. It's great to have you here today for this interview. I was fascinated by the post that you did on LinkedIn, which made me reach out and invite you here for a chat to talk about the work that you do and how you see the world and how you use that in the workplace. So I suppose you could categorize our conversation today as part of Industry 4.0 and the future of work. So if you'd like to give a wee bit of an introduction to yourself, tell us who you are and what it is you do.
Sure. So thanks, Colin, for inviting me to having this chat. I'm always interested in just connecting to people in different places who are also interested in looking at patterns, helping people collaborate more, delivering a better impact while ensuring all the pieces are engaged. So that's something I'm very passionate in. And my background is actually in psychology. I am a registered psychologist based in Hong Kong. I work a lot in Asia Pacific, but also sometimes elsewhere, for example, in Europe. The company I'm working for is called A-Train. It's a consultancy headquartered in Germany. And we do quite a lot of work with leadership development as well as organizational development. So I started my career a decade ago with executive assessment. So that's also a lot of the starting point for organizational psychologists. So we started with looking at individual leaders, doing role plays with them, also observing them in group discussions and see how they perform. And I used to spend lots of time creating leadership profiles for these people. So telling them that, okay, you're good at this and you have to develop in certain areas. Those were all, helpful, and people do, say that they get good insights from this. But what bothers me is that the actual impact of these leaders have very little to do with their individual profiles. They might be a bright star with brilliant strengths, but if they are not in a context with a team or with a culture, a system that actually enables them to show all their strengths, then it doesn't really do much. And that's also the point where some of our clients are talking to me and say, oh, you know what, Grace, I think we need more than skill building. We need mindset change. And then when they talk about mindset change, eventually they realize it's not just mindset change, it's a cultural change we're talking about. So that's when I really feel that there's something other than the individuals that we need to look at. And actually on this note, there's one example I want to share with you.
Yeah.
So A-Train in our Hong Kong office, we are doing 4-day work week. And people always ask me, okay, well, how can you do this? Like, how can you manage to get the same amount of work done with less time? Because in the end, that's about efficiency, right, and effectiveness.
Yeah.
And I said, well, look at your diary and think about, how much time you have actually spent on things that are not necessary. Some long, useless meetings that could have been done with an email. And if you go a layer deeper and ask yourself, then why are organizations having all these meetings and process that most people don't find useful, and still, keep doing that for decades?
Yep.
You realize what some teams and organizations are trying to create with those unnecessary meetings were this illusion of collaboration.
Wow, illusion of collaboration.
So they're trying to convince themselves that if we are sitting together all the time, seeing each other in the office, that means we are collaborating. But the question is that true? Because for me, that's the blockage to real work. And if we take away this blockage, I guarantee you, people can work to deliver as much with a lot less time.
Fascinating, because it's those blockages and identifying those blockages and then identifying actions as to how to overcome them, which are the essence, I think, of what you're talking about. So I would like to delve a wee bit deeper into the process of how you identify what looks like collaboration and what is collaboration.
So I looked at the beginning, it was more about looking at the patterns of an individual. So I see if someone always does something, but then later on, I went through a very experiential learning event on unconscious group dynamics. And for me, that was an eye opener, to realize that there are a lot that's underneath the surface. On the surface, it's all calm and all working well together. It makes it very clear to me that there's there's this pattern, that's this real thing that is going on, and I have to get to those real things by pointing out the illusions in the surface. Because if you ask a team, oh, do you trust each other? If you ask them in front of everyone, most people would tell you that they trust each other.
Absolutely.
We're a good team, we are fine. But if you ask them, okay, then tell me about the stories that you have about each other, a significant event that actually shows or defines your team, you get a different sense.
Okay, and how do you show that to the people that you're working with? Because one of the things that I've experienced is that it's quite challenging to get this kind of idea across to other people. Once you see it, and once you look at the world through that lens, everything begins to take on patterns. But getting the information across to other people, so how do you take the information that you're learning from them and then demonstrate it to them so that they can interpret it themselves?
Yeah, so that's where organization network analysis can come in very handy. So usually I start with teams, because I think for teams, they have less resistance in terms of getting, I think, tougher feedback. I think for them it's a tough feedback, a tough reality check sometimes to look at organization network analysis, where they see, okay, if within our teams, who is closer with who might be the one or two members who got isolated, and who might be the one or two key connectors that is sustaining the system, and even to think about, okay, what if these one or two members are gone? What if they leave the company or they rotate to some other systems, and then who else can we then rely on to maintain and connect everyone into a cohesive piece?
Yeah.
And how information flows. So there are different types of questions we ask with network analysis. So sometimes it's more on information flow. So you see, who are the hubs of information. But a lot of times you also ask about trust and closeness. So who do you feel closer with? Something that's indicating, the connections beneath the work connections.
Yeah.
And for me, that's really where true collaboration comes in.
Yeah. So do you, how do you represent the results to these teams? Do you do it visually? Do you produce reports?
Oh, yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so I found visual presentation really powerful. Because it's too bad I don't have one with me right now, but I'm sure you will see some network graphs where you basically have like groups, a cluster here and then a cluster there, and then they're just isolated. Those things are very powerful, and sometimes people do underestimate the role of like the little guys. I always say there are little guys in the organization who maybe is the tea lady, who connects everyone. Yeah. And to be able to visually see that, it's almost like putting up a mirror, in front of teams, and then they suddenly see, oh, okay, so that's how we are. And with teams, then I will usually then this should be a short questionnaire. And then it's really short, 5 questions at most, and have people share, for example, like who do you feel closer with, and who do you talk to more often, and then with that data we can generate a network graph.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can identify where this kind of pattern analysis and network analysis is particularly useful. You talked about how in your team there's only 10 people. So, my experience is that the more complex the organization and the more obvious the need to identify these patterns becomes. So complexity obviously grows with the number of people in a company. So do you have examples of where you found pattern analysis being particularly useful?
Yeah. So right now, I think mostly I'm still working with teams to help, because I think the thing is, I feel that Adrian, because we were in this sort of work, and so internally we talk about the dynamics. But then I think in many organizations, that's not the case. And to even trigger organizations to start talking about patterns, team patterns and team dynamics, that takes a nudge. And for me, that nudge is with organization network analysis. Because it's very helpful to see, okay, there really are differences in terms of how people connect. And I think accepting that differences is sometimes more difficult than I had imagined. Because I think many teams want to convince themselves that we are all equals, everyone has an equal weight in all decisions, there's no politics, and I saw you smiling with that. And I think it's sometimes for me, ONA is just really something to point out that actually there are all these things going on. If you pretend that they're not here, it's going to continue to have an impact. It's just that the impact will not be something you can foresee. Yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned to me before that you've been interested in this for a number of years, and it's been quite difficult to get people to listen to this, but you're beginning to see a shift in that process.
Yeah. And I think in a way, it's the shift comes from, I think there are many factors. One is probably people are frustrated enough with doing lots of individual training and doesn't have any return on investment.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing. So people start to see, okay, I have to look more than individuals. Yeah. And then another thing is, okay, so once people start looking beyond individuals, then what's next? And then what happened is that many organizations start introducing new processes and systems without looking at the current patterns. So what they do is, okay, now let's all be self-organizing, or let's now all have this different kind of reporting line, or we have all these cross-functional project teams. But then they also see that, okay, some of these structures succeeded, but some failed. Why? I mean, what's really making the difference? It's not the structure or the system itself is making a difference. It's something else that's making either this process work or doesn't work. So they look a bit deeper and they say, oh, okay, in the end, it's a lot to do with the interpersonal interactions. It's the connections between the individuals, among individuals, and among groups that is really making the difference. And that's where there's now more interest in this.
So when you get involved with an organization, they don't come to you initially because you are particularly interested in organizational network analysis or pattern. It's more about training and leadership. That's how you make the introduction.
Sometimes it's training leadership, sometimes it's cultural change. Sometimes it's like organizational transformation.
Okay.
A lot around agile transformation. But you see, honestly, I think organizational analysis is a tool, and I think it's a very powerful tool that can help to address a lot of the things relating to leadership, efficiency, transformation, and I think ONA it's one of the key tools to help visualize systems. And I think right now, honestly, I don't even know where are there like other ways to help visualize systems. And it's such an important thing. I think actually all organizations need to sooner or later have ONA as part of something on their annual report.
Yeah.
I actually think it's just like how many organizations are doing engagement survey now. I think that's not enough.
Yeah.
Network graphs needs to be in their annual reports.
That's really important, Grace. Can you say a wee bit more about why you don't think engagement surveys are enough? I mean, I get it, totally get it, but I think sometimes it's this bit about it can be lost in translation. If you don't see that outcomes come from this collective pattern, engagement sounds like it's collective. So why don't you think it's enough?
Well, I think with engagement surveys, the thing is, the question is, does engagement survey actually tells you how engaged people are? I've seen organizations where they say, oh, you know, my boss expect me to not put a too low a score there, otherwise we need to do follow-up work. Or sometimes it's depending on the mood of the individual on that particular day. So to this day, maybe they had a team dinner and they were very happy, and then they say, I'm very engaged. It's, well, I mean, the good thing is that I know there are now more sort of pulse check kind of engagement survey, which may actually tell you more about, you know, the reality of engagement, because it's on day-to-day basis rather than once a year.
Yeah.
But then I think even with that, it's a helpful information, but I think it doesn't give you a lot of pointers as to how you then intervene later. Because, for example, so sometimes what happens, let's say if actually this is a real case. So you may have one function that is really disengaged, and then you have another function that's highly engaged. The traditional approach is then you hire some consultants or internal people to fix the group that is very disengaged. You talk to them and you ask, oh, why are you disengaged? As if they are causing themselves to be disengaged. You know what I mean? And then of course they start telling you all these stories that are not just about themselves, but also about their interactions with other teams. And then you say, oh, but then what you then realize is, okay, this unhappy team is telling you that they're unhappy because of the interactions with the happy teams. And then you doesn't, but then I'm not. Like the organization doesn't expect me to talk to the happy teams because they think they're not broken, so you don't need to fix them. You don't need to do any intervention. They have high engagement scores.
Yeah. That's a really good explanation. That the whole point that somebody might be disengaged is their fault, you know, and in reality, it's the system that is one of the outcomes of the patterns within the system. And if you can look at the whole system, then it becomes kind of obvious that you can't fix it by trying to fix that one element. It made me think of something. I wonder if you how you see this. At the beginning, you talked about how you know, some people who would be termed a kind of a bit part player perhaps to the team, but in terms of relationships can be very, very important. So they might not be, you know, one of the leaders, but they're still very important to that collective impact. Do you think there is a role for this kind of analysis in terms of promotion or benefits, or in some way?
I do think so. I think it's acknowledging how these connectors are contributing to the system, and I think that's. I mean, I don't know in what way should it be linked to promotion or even giving them a role. Because giving them a role is also another thing, right? Then there's almost like, okay, now the responsibility of connecting and communicating lies only on those people. In a way, I think it's give an excuse for others to not do the connecting, which is also not something we want to encourage. But I think at least acknowledging that there are these people who are playing the connector roles, they may not be the traditional star performers. They may not be the one who gets the most sales, who presents with the most, you know, charming, charismatic way. But then they are contributing. They're contributing a lot, in fact. And I do think this is important to recognize connection as a contribution brings the humanity, the human side, back to business, I think, in a way.
That's really, really important part for me, because I suppose I was sort of beginning to get to the point of asking you where you think this will go in terms of, you know, what would you like to see in terms of the future and how this is used. But you've said something that's really important to me, because I think there's a growing impact on the workplace of technology, which is kind of reductionist in a way. It's removing that humanity, whereas the whole idea of collaboration and connections as a group thing begins to, because it's generally these relationships are informal. You can't formalize really these relationships. It's human interaction.
Yeah.
So this idea of bringing more humanity into the workplace, is that something that you're getting positive response from businesses? Do they recognize this as being important?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think, and I think there are two layers to that. So if you ask, okay, bringing the human side back to the business, would you agree? If you ask anyone, of course of course they will agree. I mean, think about if someone says they don't agree to that. I mean, you'd be like, you monster. So that's, I think cognitively, everyone agrees. I think it's sometimes the how and also the assumption about human nature that might be the difference. I think sometimes, I think the reductionist approach is it's a paradigm in itself, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something about individually I can be better. So even if I do a network analysis, there can be a conclusion that, okay, you see this group is isolating themselves. You see this person is not engaging with others. Now you have a one-star performer who is connecting very well with others. You can also interpret it in that way, right? You just almost use the network graph and just start highlighting the individuals in it, yeah? Mm-hmm. But I think there is a different paradigm, which is, which really is about taking things from a systemic perspective, where you realize that actually the individual who got isolated, yes, maybe could be an introvert, I don't know, but there's also a big piece on how the rest of the system is not making it easy for this person to become part of the main system. I think, you know, that's actually reminds me of saying. So in the past, there was some saying about women leaders needing to lean in more.
Mm-hmm.
And then more recently, I heard of this other line of thought saying that, well, maybe we have been giving too much positive bias towards those who lean in a lot. So it's not about people needing to speak louder, but actually maybe everyone can, you know, listen a bit more and to see through what you see and actually notice the shining bits are not the ones that's always in the forefront spamming you with information.
Yeah, I completely convinced that you're right about that we haven't understood that different ways of working have different impacts. So this bit about how women behave in the workplace is, you know, we maybe don't have enough data yet to demonstrate this, but, you know, it's really, really important that we don't just say this is how a star individual works, so that's how a star female leader should work. It has to be more about the impact on the wider system, or else we don't understand it, and that's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to highlight that I don't undermine the importance of individual behaviors, because to change a system, you need individuals to self-authorize, almost self-empower, to change and challenge the status quo. I think it's just more sort of almost stop blaming the victim kind of mindset.
I mean, there's always individuals. Everybody is an individual, and that's important. And we want to, in fact, I think by better understanding the system, I mean, my perception here is, by better understanding the system, we give people more space to be individuals. Okay, well, thanks very much for your, you know, the journey through your discovery of network analysis and patterns and how they impact on the workplace. Just to sort of bring this to a close, where would you like to see this work? You know, maybe in your own workplace, but in a wider sense, say within the next 5 to 10 years, what do you imagine that it could become?
What I hope is to see people in organizations start asking questions about the system they are in. And a behavioral sign could be that they start doing network analysis, or at least they start drawing system maps.
Yeah.
You know, if they think that, okay, I have one decision to make, I need to think about the impact. You start drawing the system map. You start involving others in creating that system map to help you see, how things might fit and who else do you need to talk to before you, make an investment or make certain decisions. I think there's higher chance to then for people to see, okay, what are the missing pieces that I have not thought of before? What are the leverage points I can tap? And I think that awareness for me would be very powerful. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been very enjoyable.
Thank you, Colin. Powerful.